Thank you very much. So two of the statements said previously are both true. I did speak at the first TEDx San Diego, and I have dressed as Superman at Comic-Con. Both are true. So I get a question at every single talk that I give and every single meeting that I have. Invariably, someone will ask me the millennial question. Apparently, and most of you in here, I think, were born after the year 1984, right? Which makes you millennials. 94-ish. 84-ish, I mean. Apparently, your generation is unleadable. Apparently, you confound leaders. And I travel around talking about this thing called leadership, and apparently you're the one they have no idea what to do with, which I think is funny. And so what they've started to do then is ask you what you want. And you reply back, free food and beanbags. Open plan. And so they do that, and yet nothing changes. And so instead of trying to figure it out and try and understand you guys, they accuse you of being entitled. They accuse you of being narcissistic. Sometimes accuse you of being lazy. I've heard that one. And I think that they are completely wrong. I think what they haven't spent the time to do is to practice empathy, which ironically is the first criteria of being a good leader, which is you have to be good at empathy. And so when I get asked this question all the time, it only makes sense that I should empathize and try and have an answer, right? So here's what I tell everybody. I've broken it down into sort of 4 observations: parenting, technology, impatience, and environment. Many of this young generation, of this millennial generation, were subject to what has been described as a failed parenting strategy. Some of you and many of your friends were raised being told that you were special. And you were told that you can have whatever you want just because you want it. Many schools gave participation ribbons. So in other words, kids got medals for coming in last. And the science on this is good. We know what it does is it devalues the feeling and the medal for the person who actually works hard to come in first, and it embarrasses the person who comes in last because they know they don't deserve it, and it makes them feel worse. Some kids got into honors classes not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some kids got A's not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. And then you graduate. And you get a job. And in an instant, your entire self-view is shattered. Because many kids find out that they're not special. They find out that they can't have whatever they want just because they want it. There's nothing when you come in last. You get no medal for coming in last, and your parents cannot help you get a promotion. And so what the result is an entire generation where there's a disproportionately high number of people growing up with lower self-confidence than previous generations, because this entire self-image is completely shattered instantaneously. And so much so that I actually hear stories of people's parents filling out their job applications for them and other things, right? It's that bad, right? Then you combine it with the second observation, which is technology. We know that when we engage with social media or our cell phones, a chemical in our body called dopamine is released, right? It's what makes us feel good, right? Dopamine is the same chemical that is released in our bodies when we find something we're looking for, like your keys, when you go on Google, when you hit the goal or win the game, that yes, this sense of joy or sort of that's dopamine. Well, we know that we get a hit of dopamine when we engage with social media or when our phones go buzz, bing, flash, or beep. That's why if you're feeling a little bit down, you pull out your phone and you send 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 hi. And you hope that somebody texts you back because when they do, it feels good, right? There are other things that release dopamine. Alcohol, nicotine, gambling, all release dopamine. It's why they feel good, and almost all addictions are dopamine-based addictions. We also know that almost all alcoholics discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. You see, when we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. Then when we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe. It is a time of high stress and high anxiety, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and the numbing effects of dopamine. And unfortunately, that connection becomes hardwired. And then for the rest of their lives, every time they face significant stress, they don't turn to a person, they turn to the bottle, right? Now, as I said before, we know that social media and cell phones release dopamine. Now, we have age restrictions on alcohol, we have age restrictions on tobacco, and we have age restrictions on gambling, but we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones. It's as if an entire generation who are going through adolescence, their parents have thrown open the liquor cabinet and said, try the vodka to help you get through the teenage years. That's what social media and cell phones do. So unfortunately, for too many people, that connection is becoming hardwired. And as they grow up, when they face significant stress in their lives, instead of learning to turn to a person, they turn to a device. Right? Where we seek solace in social media, where we'll check an Instagram post, how many likes we're getting. We'll check, and 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 we'll check. And sometimes our own self-worth comes from how many followers we have. It can become devastating to us when somebody unfollows us, right? The only way that we stand away from stress when we face it, in other words, an entire generation is growing up having not practiced or learned coping mechanisms for stress. This is very, very serious for social animals that need each other, where we haven't learned those skills. And it's even worse, because if you want to go on a date, you don't have to learn to be like, hey. You just swipe right. You just got a date. You can have 4 dates in an evening, right? And if you don't like the person, you don't have to learn to say no when you mean yes, and yes when you mean no, and yes when you just swipe left. It's done. In other words, the social skills aren't developing. And so there's an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-confidence, going into a workforce, having their self-image shattered, not knowing necessarily how to deal with all the stress that they're facing of growing up and starting a career and finding out where you fit and all of that good stuff. And instead of turning to a person, we're turning to devices. And the results are starting to show up in the statistics. We know that suicide is on the rise amongst this generation. We know that accidental death due to overdoses is on the rise amongst this generation. Depression is on the rise amongst this generation. Universities are suffering an epidemic where they're dealing with disproportionately high numbers of students than they've ever dealt with ever before, taking leaves of absence due to depression. And then to compound the effect, it's a generation that's grown up with filters, Facebook and Instagram, and we curate our own lives and present to the world how we want to be seen, and we make ourselves look good, and we make the weather look better, and the sunsets are always more bright in Instagram than they were in real life. In other words, we're good at presenting ourselves as we're not, but how we want to be seen. And so everybody thinks this generation is strong and confident. And all the companies we go work for, they think we have it all figured out, and we certainly sound. I say we. I only dress like a 16-year-old. This generation presents itself as having all the answers, and yet they don't. And stress runs high, and they don't know how to ask for help. And it gets worse. Then you add in the manner in which so many people grew up in this generation with a sense of impatience. Now, as I said before, you're often accused of being entitled, and it certainly seems that way. But I think it's a misreading of the tea leaves. You've grown up in a world of instant gratification. You want to buy something, you go on Amazon, it shows up the next day. You want to watch a movie? Don't check movie times, you just stream it whenever you want to watch it. TV shows, you don't wait week to week to week, you can binge watch the whole weekend. And like I said, even dating is just a swipe to the right, right? Everything is instant. Everything is instant gratification. And the problem is too many people have applied that sense of instant gratification to their careers and to their lives. And the problem is there ain't no app for that. I hear from this generation that too many people struggle to form, their words, not mine, struggle to form deep, meaningful relationships. Many will admit that most of their friendships are superficial. Many will admit that their friends would cancel on them if something better came along. Many would admit that they don't have deep, trusting, loving relationships with their own friends. That's because it's a journey. I talk to so many smart, fantastic, ambitious, idealistic, hard-working kids, and they're right out of college, they're in their entry-level jobs, and I'll ask them, how's it going? And they'll say, I think I'm going to quit. And I'm like, why? They say to me, I'm not making an impact. I'm like, you know you've been here 8 months, right? They treat the sense of fulfillment or even love like it's a scavenger hunt, like it's something you look for. My millennial friends, they've gone through so many jobs. They're either getting fired, I mean it was mutual, or they're quitting because they're not making an impact, or they're not finding the thing they're looking for, they're not feeling fulfilled, as if it's a scavenger hunt. Love, a job you find joy from, is not something you discover. It's not like, I found love. Here it is. I found a job I love. That's not how it works. Both of those things require hard work. You are in love because you work very hard every single day of your life to stay in love. You find a job that brings you ultimate joy because you work hard every single day to serve those around you, and you maintain that joy. It's not a discovery. But the problem is the sense of impatience. It's as if an entire generation is standing at the foot of a mountain. They know exactly what they want. They can see the summit. What they can't see is the mountain. This large, immovable object. That doesn't mean you have to do your time. That's not what I'm talking about. Take a helicopter, climb, I don't care. But there's still a mountain. Life, career fulfillment, relationships are journeys. The problem is, this entire generation has an institutionalized sense of impatience. And do they have the patience to go on the journey to maintain love, to feel fulfilled? Or do they just quit and on to the next, dump and on to the next, ghost and on to the next? And by the way, ghosting means the lack of skill to have a confrontation. You date somebody for 6 months, 8 months, and then just stop replying. You just delete them from everything. Now, for the person who's doing the ghosting, oh, that's certainly easier than a confrontation. But the person on the receiving end of the ghosting, it's like there's a death. They're suddenly shunned. There's panic. They call out, they're worried. They call out, they're worried. They think it's you. They think it's them. Do you have any idea the destruction that we reap on people by ghosting them? And then because there's the lack of social skills to call out and ask for help, they internalize, and it makes them feel awful to the point. At the worst, they will kill themselves. Slightly one level down, they'll get depressed. But the lowest level that we can hope for is they will go through life, and I'm not talking about ghosting, I'm talking an entire generation, that if we don't fix this, we'll go through life where everything's just fine. My friendships are fine. My work is fine. You know, same old, same old. Nothing's ever amazing. And the scavenger hunt continues. And then you go to the fourth observation, the most egregious of all of them, environment. We're taking a generation that has lower self-esteem. We're taking a generation that has a lack of coping mechanisms to deal with stress. We're dealing with a generation that wants all those things fixed immediately, and we're placing them in work environments that values money more than people. Do you know that most of the business philosophies, most of the business theories that we embrace and see as standard today are not standard? They're theories left over from the 80s and 90s. The concept of shareholder supremacy was a theory proposed in the late 1970s. It was popularized in the 80s and 90s. The concept of using mass layoffs to balance the books did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s. It did not exist. It became popular in the 80s and 90s. The 80s and 90s were boom years. Anyone could make money. Relative peace, a kinder, gentler Cold War. And so all of the business theories that were put forth were very, very selfish and all about enriching ourselves. And they worked for those times. But these times are different. These are not peaceful times. These are not boom years. There's globalization and the internet, which has now made everything vastly more complicated, and those theories do not work anymore. Worse, they're having side effects. It's really bad. Because what we do is we destroy corporate cultures. The idea of using mass layoffs, can you imagine sending someone home and saying, I'm sorry, I can no longer provide for our family because the company missed its arbitrary projections this year. That's what we're doing. That's like a coach prioritizing the needs of the fans over the needs of the players, hoping to build a great team. It doesn't work. We dismantled things like the Glass-Steagall Act. Glass-Steagall was passed after the Great Depression to prevent another Great Depression from happening. It was dismantled in the 80s and the 90s in the name of profit. Okay? Do you know how many stock market crashes we had between the Great Depression and the dismantling of Glass-Steagall? The answer is 0. And since they dismantled Glass-Steagall, we had 87, the dot-com crash, 2008. We've had 3 stock market crashes because we removed the safety mechanisms that prevent stock market crashes from happening, all in the name of individual advancement and profit. And these are the corporate cultures we've built. Corporate cultures that value numbers over people. And they are not standard business practices. They are new, and they are broken, and they are dangerous, and we're asking a young, wonderful, ambitious, amazing generation that needs us to work in these environments. Whether we like it or not, we have to take responsibility for the bad hand that you've been dealt. It is up to the companies to create an environment in which you can build your self-confidence. It is up to the companies to create an environment in which you can learn coping mechanisms and learn how to build strong, close relationships with people with whom you work, that you will eventually love and sacrifice to see that they gain. It is in these environments that we will learn the patience and the hard work that it takes to find fulfillment in our lives, to find a sense of purpose, a sense of joy. Yes, it's all fine and good that my generation and older generations say to you things like, well, you're the future leaders. We're the leaders now. We're the ones in control of the corporate environments now. And we're making your lives worse. I don't want you to jump from job to job to job to job. You will never find what you're looking for. It's not a scavenger hunt. I don't want you to go from relationship to relationship to relationship. What I want you to do is stand up and demand that the places in which you work lead you properly. Nobody wants to wake up in the morning and be managed. We want to wake up in the morning and be led. And we have a total leadership crisis in America. Politics is just the mirror reflection. We get the politicians we deserve. We're the divided ones. We're the selfish ones. We're the broken ones. We're the ones who would sooner sacrifice somebody else so that we may gain. It's us. And until we're willing to do the hard work of repairing the world around us, our country, our politics, our businesses will not fix. Which leads me to my second point. Understanding the game we're playing. This game called work, or life, or love, or whichever one you want, or all of them. In game theory, there are 2 kinds of games. There are finite games, and there are infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon objective. Baseball. We all agree what the rules are, and at the end of 9 innings, whoever has more runs, we declare the winner, and the game is over. No one ever says, wait, if we can just play 3 more innings, I know we can come back and win. Doesn't happen. Right? You have winners and you have losers. Right? Then there's an infinite game. An infinite game is defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is to keep the game in play, to perpetuate the game. When you pit a finite player versus a finite player, the system is stable. Baseball is stable. When you pit an infinite player versus an infinite player, the system is also stable. The Cold War was stable because there can be no winners and losers. It doesn't exist. That's not a scenario we want. And so you keep the game in play to keep it stable. And in an infinite game, because there are no winners or losers, what happens is players drop out when they run out of the will or the resources to play. And then they're replaced by other players. The game perpetuates. The players change out. Problems arise when you pit a finite player versus an infinite player. Because the finite player is playing to win, and the infinite player is playing to stay in the game. And the finite player will always get frustrated. They will find themselves in quagmire. This was the United States and Vietnam. We were fighting to win. They were fighting for their lives. This was the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They were fighting to beat the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen would fight for as long as was necessary. Now, let's look at the game of business. The game of business is, by its very definition, an infinite game. It has pre-existed before every single company on this planet ever existed, and it will outlast every single company on this planet. But if you listen to the words of most companies, they don't know the game they're in. You listen to companies, they want to be number one. Based on what metrics? Based on what time frames? Revenues? Market share? Square footage? Number of employees? Based on a quarter, a year? 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? I didn't agree to those standards. You can't suddenly just arbitrarily say we're number one. No one else agreed to the standards. It's nonsense to beat our competition. Based on what? And they study their competition, trying to outdo their competition. And yet I've never heard of a company that's taken down by the competitors they know. They're always taken down by the competitors they don't know. Do you think MySpace knew that Facebook existed? They were worried about Friendster. You can't make strategic decisions from studying your competition. You can make tactical decisions from studying your competition, but not strategic decisions. But when you listen to the way most companies play the game, they're in the wrong game. That's why they get frustrated. The great organizations understand that they're playing to stay in the game. Jim Senegal, the founder of Costco, says Wall Street's in the business of making the quarter of the year. We're in the business of building a company for the next 50 years. The understanding of knowing what game you're in radically changes the kinds of decisions you make and the way you see the world. It is also tremendously confidence building. Let me give you a true story. I spoke at a education, that's funny. I spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit for Apple. At the education summit for Microsoft, I would say that 70% of the executives spent about 70% of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple Education Summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One is playing this way, and one is playing that way. One is playing finite, and the other one is playing infinite. Guess which one gets frustrated? So at the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. And let me tell you, this thing was spectacular. It was the most elegant piece of technology I'd ever used. The user interface was incredible. The design was spectacular. I absolutely loved it. It was easy to use, and it was bright and gorgeous and fantastic. It didn't work on iTunes, which is a different problem, so I couldn't use it, but it was amazing. And elegant. My God, it was elegant. So I'm sitting in the back of a taxi with a very senior Apple executive, sort of employee number 12 kind of guy. And, you know, I like to stir pots. So I turned to him, I said, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune. And it is so much better than your iPod Touch. And he turned to me and he said, I have no doubt. Conversation over. Because the infinite player understands sometimes you're ahead and sometimes you're behind. Sometimes your product is better and sometimes it's worse. The goal isn't to be the best every day. The goal isn't to outdo your competition every day. That's a finite construction. If I had said to Microsoft, I've got the new iPod Touch and it's so much better than your Zoom, they would have said, can we see it? What does it do? React, 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 react. Finite players play to beat the people around them. Infinite players play to be better than themselves. To wake up every single day and say, how can we make our company a better version of itself today than it was yesterday? How can we create a product this week that's better than the product we created last week? We also have to play the infinite game. It's not about being ranked number one. It's not about having more followers on Twitter than your friends. It's not about outdoing anyone. It's about how to outdo yourself. It's not about selling more books or getting more TED views than somebody else. It's about how to make sure that the work that you're producing is better than the work you produced before. You are your competition. And that is what ensures you stay in the game the longest. And that is what ensures you find joy. Because the joy comes not from comparison, but from advancement. The problem is, we're human beings, and we love to compare. We love a ranking. Oh, we love a ranking. Top 10 this, top 100 that. Oh, we love a ranking. You know? Every industry has got its own rankings, and we love to be on those rankings, even though most of the rankings are arbitrary, and you can pretty much foil most of them. You can buy your way onto most of them, right? But I'm on the list, right? They did a study, who do all the studies. They did a study where they asked people if they wanted a free $400,000 house on a block where all the other houses are $100,000, or a free $1 million house on a block where all the other houses are $4 million. Most people took the $400,000 house. We just love to be better than each other. But that is a depressing way to live a life. What I urge you to do, if you are not a millennial, is to have a little empathy for the millennials around you. They were dealt a bad hand, and unfortunately, we have to help them build their confidence, find their patience, and break the habit from their technology so that they can learn the social skills that they need to live happy, joyful lives. If you are a millennial, it's not you. And take care of the millennial friends that you have around you, because they're not mad at you and they're not bad people. They were dealt the same bad hand that you were dealt. Don't demand that they take care of you. Take care of them. And that's part of the problem. There's an entire section in the bookshop called self-help, and there's no section in the bookshop called help others. And the way that we fix the problems in the world is not by trying to demand that people help us. How can I lose 10 pounds? How can I find love? How can I find the job of my dreams? That's what all the books say. No, it should be, how can I help my friend live a healthy lifestyle? How can I help my friend find a lifetime of fulfillment? That's what it's about. It's about service to others, because that's what it means to be human. Everything about our makeup, our biology and our anthropology is designed to get us to look after each other. Everything about our makeup is designed to get us to take care of each other. That's why an event like this feels better than watching it online, because we get to sit next to each other. We get to sit with each other. It's nicer for me too. It's much nicer for me to be here with you, because we're social. But we all have a responsibility in this tribe. If you want to have a happy, successful, fulfilling, confident life, you have to commit yourself to take care of the people around you. That's just how it works.